Hello BookTube, I'm Heather and I have another weekly wrap-up for you. You'll hear more than the usual background noise today, with the usual construction and traffic and emergency vehicles, but with the bonus of thunder. There's a cell of thunderstorms slowly rolling through. But nevertheless, I am going to try and sum up my reading for the last week and a bit. Despite my claim that I'm trying to avoid recently published novels, I have in fact finished 3 recently published books. They're not all novels, I misspoke. And I was struggling to think about how to make them cohere in some sense, because they're 3 very different books, but they actually do have a thematic link that wouldn't be obvious to you. And I think that thematic link has shaped my response to them in some ways, in some unexpected ways. So the first one I mentioned, I think probably in my last but one video, Hellions by Julia Elliott, which just won the Carol Shields Prize. And it's a collection of short stories. And when I started it, I had read the first 2 stories. And I noticed that there was a really interesting contrast in tone between the first story, which was set in a medieval period in a convent, and the second story, which is set in the US South, Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas. Very different time frames, very different approaches into topic. But then I read the rest of the short stories in the collection, and the convent-based short story is an anomaly. Most of the stories are more similar to the second story. So almost all of the stories are about odd encounters with nature as a contrast to the civilized or the built. And most of the stories involve some kind of friction between adults and children, more specifically mothers and children. And the pattern is, not surprisingly, that the children are presented as natural or wild and the mothers as not. But not all the mothers are particularly presented as competent. Most of the mothers are, in some sense, incompetent at mothering. And nothing wrong with that theme or that approach to storytelling. But what I found is that after reading about 10 stories, all with the same kind of thematic pattern, wild versus not wild, creepy versus not creepy, and many of the stories have a creepy element to them. I found it was a little unsatisfying for me as a reader by the end of the short story collection. There's not as much tonal variation or topical variation in the collection as the first 2 stories would lead you to believe, but they're all well written. There's some beautiful turns of phrases from story to story, but they're all tonally the same, and they're all exploring this edge of kind of creepiness, grotesque, and as a result, they didn't work for me, because I don't usually read stuff that's creepy and grotesque, but they're well written short stories, and they all have this element of the weird about them. So mixed results for me with that one. The next one I finished was Ali Smith's latest novel, Glyph with a Y, and the connecting theme here is the weird. So Glyph with a Y is the story of Patch, Petra, and Billy. Billy is Petra's daughter, or Bill, she calls herself, and I think there's been a fair amount of chatter about this on BookTube. It's largely the story of Petra and Patch's, or Patricia's, relationship, and as they reflect on their childhood, which includes the death of their mother and living in a home that becomes increasingly chaotic. So there's another connection to the Hellions that I didn't expect. But also it's got ghosts in it, the sense of the weird, the sense of the otherworldly, in the same way that Hellions has not ghosts. Well, maybe there's one with ghosts, but otherworldliness, non-naturalness. And I wouldn't have expected that connection. And Smith's book is quite interesting in its exploration of dissent, essentially, and that operates basically around two angles. One in dissent around World War I, and the question of desertion and what happens to deserters. It wasn't anything good. And dissent in the 21st century, particularly around Gaza. Nothing dire happens around that, but there's a very sharp portrait of Bill as a teenager's opposition to political events of the 21st century. And I found this is kind of a middling Smith novel. It's got all of the things that I like about Smith and appreciate in her writing. Playfulness about language, playfulness about the form. She's got this really interesting ability to create characters that you want to care about or characters you want to know more about. But at the same time, she frustrates that. She doesn't really invest much energy in completing stories and having well-rounded conclusions to the novels. So I would place this as a middling Smith novel. Good, but not, for me, extraordinary. What else? What was the next one? Maggie O'Farrell's Land. Also, this one just came out. I snagged it from the library. And this one is the story of Thomas and Fina and their 4 children, and it's set largely in Ireland across the 1860s and 1880s, and then roughly into the 20th century, just edges into the 20th century. And it's a historical novel and family saga about the effects of the famine, the potato famine in Ireland. There were potato famines in North America at the same time, and half a generation earlier with less dire effects. So the effects of the famine, dissolution of communities, disruption of family lives, and the outward migration of Irish people, whether it's from small villages to cities or out of Ireland to other places. And Farrell has a really fine touch in maneuvering you through a plot structure and a story structure, and quite admirable, I think, and especially in the first half of the book, manipulation of time, of how the novel moves back and forth through multiple timescapes, and then later on through multiple landscapes and geographies. Quite good, I think, in its realism and its representation of what life would have been like during the famine, what the repercussions of the famine were in people's personal lives and their personalities. And for that alone, I think it's worth reading. I do think, however, that it's got some limitations, and this probably puts me in a minority of readers. I think there's some of the machinery that Farrell needs to advance her plot that is a little predictable if you have a sense of how these kinds of stories can go. So a little off-putting, or a little disappointing. Disappointing is a better word. It's a fine novel. You won't be disappointed if you read it, but if you tend to prefer novels that veer towards the realistic, the novels that veer towards the fantastic or the weird, and there's that theme running and connecting through all these 3 novels. If your preference is for the more realistic form of the novel rather than the more fantastical version of the novel, there are parts of Land that will frustrate you. Not a bad novel, but not, I suspect, O'Farrell's best, but I've only just finished it, so I could be totally, absolutely wrong. So that's the 3 books that I've finished this week. Ooh, more thunder. Excellent thunder. I've got lots of things on the go. I've got a collection of Sontag's essays that I'm partway through. I'm partway through reading a Eudora Welty. I've never read a Welty novel before, so I'm reading Delta Wedding. I'm halfway through, and interesting, really interesting. In terms of her sentences, the only thing I can think of that's similar to her on the sentence level, it would be Elizabeth Bowen, and I did not expect that at all. What else have I got on the go? Oh, I'm still poking away through Martha Gellhorn's collection of letters. Very slow going because I'm not picking it up. And what else have I got on the go? This is a problem for me, how many books I have on the go. Still poking away through Dorothy Richardson. I think I'm, maybe 40 pages into Revolving Lights. Not as hard going as I found Deadlock. And partway through Emma, which I read last when I was 19 or 20 and really didn't understand the comedy in it, despite the professor at the front of the class explaining it to me. I really didn't get it. And this time through I'm finding it kind of hilarious, which I didn't expect. So that's a good thing in my reading this week, is to suddenly discover how funny this particular Austen novel can be. It's not my favorite, but I'm delighted to discover how funny I find it at this stage of life. I hope you've had a good reading week and that you have many good books to read in your pile, even if you are reading too many at once. Bye-bye.